The city never sleeps. But it's not the noise that should keep you awake. It's what hides inside it. Every street has a story. Every hallway remembers something. And some places were never meant to be found. This is NullxSector, where the ordinary fractures and something else leaks through. The mirror in the laundromat. A NullxSector original. You know what nobody talks about when they talk about laundromats? Nobody mentions the sound they make when they are empty. Not the machines, not the dryers or the water pipes or the fluorescent bulbs ticking above your head like the pulse of something slow and sick. I mean the room itself, the way a laundromat at 2 in the morning breathes. Like it has been holding something in all day long, and now that the crowds are gone, and the children have stopped crying, and the old women have folded their last bedsheets and shuffled home, it can finally exhale. I have been inside a lot of empty rooms. I have pressed myself into corners that your geometry says should not exist, spaces between walls, the dark gap behind a medicine cabinet, the nowhere place that opens up when two mirrors face each other and the reflections recurse down into infinity. But there is something about a laundromat after midnight that feels like standing inside the ribcage of something patient, something ancient, something that has learned how to wait in the way only old things can. Not eagerly, not hungrily, just inevitably. This one was called Spin Plus, open 24 hours, corner of Lavica and West 8th, in a part of the city that used to be working class before the developers moved in and scraped it down to the bone and rebuilt it with glass and reclaimed wood and cold brew coffee shops that charged $7 for something your grandmother made for free. Spin Plus survived somehow. Wedged between a craft cocktail bar that served drinks with smoke rising off them and a vacant office suite that still had a tech startup logo peeling off the glass. It sat there like a rotten tooth the dentist missed. The sign out front buzzed in a shade of green that made your skin look like something pulled from a shower drain. Nobody thought about it. Nobody looked at it for too long, which is exactly the kind of place where things like this take root. Marcus Boyle discovered it the way most people discover the places that change them. By accident, by necessity, by the small failure of an ordinary system that pushes you a few blocks out of your routine and into a space you were never meant to enter. His apartment building had flooded. A pipe burst on the 4th floor and sent brown water down through the walls until the basement laundry room was destroyed. Every washer down there was dead. The landlord promised a plumber by Monday, and Monday became Wednesday, and Wednesday became a text that said still working on it with no period at the end. Marcus had 3 days of wearable clothes left and a 12-hour shift at the warehouse starting at 6 in the morning. So he loaded a garbage bag with everything he had worn that week and walked 9 blocks through a Tuesday night that smelled like wet asphalt and garbage truck runoff. He found Spin Plus at 1:15 in the morning. The door was propped open with a rubber wedge. The air inside was warm and damp and carried the permanent smell of detergent and mildew and the metallic tang of coins handled by 1,000 strangers. 40 washers lined the left wall in 2 rows. 30 dryers lined the right. A folding table sat in the center of the room, scarred with pen marks and coffee rings, and a long gouge that might have been made by a knife. And along the back wall, stretching the full length of the room, was a mirror. Not a decorative mirror, not some designer decision meant to open the space up and make a narrow room feel wider. This was a single unbroken pane of glass running maybe 35 feet from one corner to the other, bolted directly into the cinder block wall with heavy steel brackets at 6-inch intervals. The edges were raw, no frame, no border, just glass meeting concrete. The surface was clean, but it was not reflective in the way you expect a mirror to be. It did not bounce the fluorescent light back into the room. It seemed to absorb it, pull it inward, swallow it the way wet fabric soaks up water until there is nothing left on the surface. Marcus did not notice the mirror at first. He was tired in the deep way that warehouse work makes you tired. Not sleepy, depleted. His shoulders ached from loading boxes onto conveyor belts for 11 hours straight. His knees had that grinding feeling that comes from standing on concrete in shoes that cost $19. His eyes were doing that thing where the edges of your vision go soft and unfocused, and the world starts to look like it is being viewed through smudged glass if you stand still for too long. He loaded 2 machines, darks and whites and a red flannel shirt all jammed in together because the machines took quarters and he had exactly enough in a plastic sandwich bag. He fed the coins into the slots and pressed the buttons and listened to the water fill, and he sat down in one of the molded plastic chairs near the folding table. He pulled out his phone. The Wi-Fi was barely there. 1 bar, enough to load text messages but not enough to stream anything. He scrolled through nothing for a while. Read a 3-day-old text from his mother asking if he had eaten. Read a notification from his bank telling him his balance was below $50. The usual architecture of a life running on fumes and routine. That was when he looked up and noticed the mirror. Not saw it, noticed it. There is a difference. You can see something every day and never register it. The crack in your ceiling. The face in the window across the street that is always watching when you look up but gone when you look back. Seeing is passive. Noticing is when your brain sends a signal up from somewhere deep and primitive and says, hold on. Stop scrolling. Something in this room is wrong. Marcus was looking at his own reflection sitting across the room in the mirror on the back wall. He was in the chair, phone in his hand, shoulders slumped. The reflection showed the same thing. Same posture, same angle, same gray hoodie and same jeans and same scuffed white sneakers with the left sole starting to separate. Except the reflection was not moving at the same time he was. It was behind, just barely. A fraction of a second that was almost invisible but not quite. He tilted his head to the left and his reflection followed, but there was a gap, a stutter, like watching a video call where the connection has dipped just enough to throw the sync off by a heartbeat. He raised his right hand. The reflection raised its right hand, but the motion arrived after his, not before, not simultaneously, after. He stood up. The reflection stood up a microsecond later, like it had to process his movement first, like it was watching him and then deciding to match. Marcus walked slowly toward the mirror. His reflection walked toward him, but it walked slower. And when Marcus stopped 3 feet from the glass, his reflection took 1 more step, then stopped. It was closer to the surface than it should have been. The geometry was wrong. If he was 3 feet from the glass, the reflection should have appeared to be 3 feet behind it, but it looked like it was standing just inches from the other side, close enough to fog the surface with breath if it was breathing. He told himself it was the lighting. He told himself he was exhausted and his brain was manufacturing anomalies from ordinary stimuli. People see patterns in static, faces in wood grain. It is called pareidolia, and it explained everything and nothing at the same time. He went back to his chair. He did not look at the mirror again for the rest of the cycle. When his clothes were done, he stuffed them damp into the garbage bag because the dryers took more quarters than he had. He walked home through streets that felt emptier than they should have been at 2:30 in the morning, even for this neighborhood, even for a Tuesday. The silence had a texture to it, a density, like the city had been muted by something pressing down on it from above. He slept for 3 hours and went to work and lifted boxes for 11 more hours, and came home and ate cold cereal out of the box and did not think about the mirror. Until Thursday. The pipe was still broken. The landlord had stopped responding to texts entirely. Marcus loaded another garbage bag and walked the 9 blocks back to Spin Plus through a mist that was not quite rain and not quite fog, but something in between that stuck to his skin and would not wipe off. This time there was someone else inside. A woman sat in the far corner near the vending machine. She was maybe 60 years old. Gray hair pulled back tight against her skull. She wore a quilted jacket and canvas shoes, and she had a canvas bag at her feet that was not a laundry bag. There were no clothes in it. There was no detergent. Nothing that suggested she had come here to wash anything. She was staring at the mirror. Marcus loaded his machines and sat down. He tried not to look at the back wall, but the woman made it impossible. She was completely still, not reading, not looking at a phone, not fidgeting or adjusting her position or doing any of the small involuntary movements that living bodies make when they occupy space. She was just sitting there, staring at the glass with an expression that Marcus could not name. It was not fear. It was not calm. It was something stranded between the two. Like she was watching something approach from a great distance across a flat plain, and she had already done the math on whether she could outrun it, and the answer was no. Marcus looked at the mirror. His reflection was sitting in the chair, same posture, same angle, same delay that he told himself he had imagined on Tuesday night. But the woman was not in the reflection. He looked at her directly. She was right there, 15 feet away, solid and dimensional and breathing. Her chest rose and fell. Her fingers twitched on her lap. She blinked at intervals that were human and irregular and alive. He looked at the mirror. The row of chairs along the right wall was reflected accurately. The vending machine was reflected accurately. The dryers behind her were reflected accurately. But the chair where she sat was empty in the glass. She simply did not exist on the other side. He looked back at her. She was looking at him now. She said, "Do not stare at it for too long." Her voice was low, not a whisper. A statement delivered at a volume meant for two people in an empty room. He asked her what she meant. She said, "The mirror learns. It takes time, but it learns. The longer you look, the more it understands about how you move, how you hold your weight, how your eyes track across a room when you are thinking versus when you are watching versus when you are afraid. It catalogs the micro-expressions, the way your mouth tightens just before you speak, the way your hands move when you are lying. It builds a model of you from the outside in, and once that model is complete, it does not need you anymore." Marcus asked her what that meant. What happens when it does not need you? She said her husband came here 3 weeks ago, Leonard. He had been coming here for months, ever since the washers in their building started breaking down one by one. He would bring the laundry on Tuesday nights and sit here and wait, and he never mentioned the mirror. Not once. She did not know how long he had been looking at it, how many sessions he had given it, how many hours of uninterrupted attention he had fed into the glass. She said when he came home 3 weeks ago, he was different. Not wrong exactly, just different. Like someone had taken him apart carefully and respectfully and put him back together with most of the same pieces, but a few critical ones had been substituted. He smiled at the wrong times. He answered questions a half-second too late. He started standing in doorways without entering rooms. Just standing there at the threshold with his hands at his sides, and his head tilted slightly to one side like he was listening to something she could not hear. He chewed his food more slowly than he ever had. He stopped blinking when he watched television. She said she came back to the laundromat to see if the mirror remembered him. She said it did. She said if she sat here long enough and let her eyes relax and stopped trying to focus, she could see Leonard in the glass. Not the Leonard who came home and stood in doorways. The Leonard from before, moving behind the surface, packing back and forth, pressing his hands against the inside of the glass. Looking out at the room with an expression that made her stomach hurt, because it was the expression of a man who can see his home but cannot reach it. Marcus told her she needed sleep. He said it gently because she seemed fragile in a way that had nothing to do with her age or her body. She seemed like someone who had been pulled thin, stretched over a frame that was slightly too large for the material, and the weave was starting to show through. She looked at him and the air in the room got heavier. She said, "You already looked, did you not? You already noticed the delay." He did not need to answer. She read it on his face. She picked up her canvas bag and stood and walked to the door. Before she left, she stopped and turned around and looked at him one more time. She said one thing. She said, "Do not look away too fast. It startles them." Then she was gone. Marcus sat in the plastic chair and listened to the washers churn and the fluorescents hum, and he tried to assemble a version of reality that did not include what the woman had told him. He tried to file it under grief, under delusion, under the kind of magical thinking that descends on people when they lose someone to something they cannot explain. A man changes. His wife invents a reason. A mirror becomes a monster because that is easier than accepting that the person you married simply became someone else over time, the way all people become someone else over time. That was the rational explanation. That was the version that let the floor stay solid. But he could not stop himself from looking. He looked at the mirror and his reflection looked back, and this time the delay was longer. A full second, maybe closer to 2. He blinked. The reflection blinked after. He turned his head right. The reflection turned its head right after. And when the reflection completed the motion, it did not settle into the same position. His chin was tilted slightly down. The reflection's chin was level. His hands were resting on his knees. The reflection's hands were on the armrests. The posture was similar but not identical, close enough to pass at a glance, wrong enough to claw at something deep inside his chest. It was not copying him. It was interpreting him, taking the raw data of his movements and running it through something and producing an output that resembled the input the way a cover song resembles the original. The notes are there. The rhythm is close, but the voice is different. Marcus felt something cold settle into the base of his spine. Not fear exactly. Something older and deeper and less articulate than fear. Something from the part of the brain that existed before language, before fire. Before the first, human looked into still water and saw a face looking back, and felt for the first time the vertigo of seeing yourself from the outside. The part that knows when you are being studied by something that has no name and no shape, and no intention, beyond the patient systematic work of learning how to wear your skin. He looked away, slowly, deliberately. He stared at the floor and counted tiles, and when his washers beeped he stood and moved to the dryers without raising his eyes above waist level. He fed quarters into the machines and pressed the buttons and sat back down and stared at his phone screen until the brightness made his eyes water, and he still did not look up. 45 minutes later, his clothes were dry. He loaded the garbage bag and walked toward the door. He was almost there. 3 steps from the rubber wedge and the street and the cold air and the ordinary world. He felt something behind him, not a sound, a displacement. The air pressure in the room shifted the way it shifts when something large moves from one space to another without touching the floor, like the room had inhaled suddenly and was holding it. Marcus did not turn around. He walked through the door and into the street, and he kept walking, and he did not look back. He told himself this was all in his head. He went back Friday night. He did not plan to. He told himself his clothes from Thursday were still damp and he needed the dryers. That was true, but it was not the reason. The reason was the mirror. The reason was that he could not stop thinking about the delay, about the interpretation, about the woman and her husband standing in doorways, about what was behind the glass that was patient enough and methodical enough and interested enough to spend hours learning the specific way a man blinks. The laundromat was empty. Just Marcus and the machines and the fluorescent light, and the mirror running the length of the back wall like a window into a room that should not exist. He did not load a machine. He sat down in the center chair directly facing the glass and he looked. His reflection was already there, already looking, not mimicking him, not delayed, just looking. It sat in the chair with its hands folded in its lap and its head tilted slightly to the right and its eyes fixed on Marcus with an expression that he had never in his life made on his own face. It was curiosity, genuine, simple, dispassionate curiosity. The way a biologist studies a slide under a microscope. The way a child watches an ant carry a crumb, not with cruelty, not with appetite. Just with the calm, vast patience of something that has all the time that has ever existed, and has chosen to spend a portion of it learning what you are. Marcus raised his hand. The reflection did not move. He waved. The reflection watched his hand move through the air and did nothing. He stood up, The reflection stayed seated. It crossed one leg over the other, a gesture Marcus associated with comfort, with confidence, with someone who is exactly where they want to be. He walked toward the mirror. The reflection watched him approach. Its eyes tracked him the way a security camera follows motion, smooth and steady and mechanical, and without the small saccadic jumps that human eyes make when they shift focus. When he was 2 feet from the glass, he could see details he had not noticed before. The reflection was wearing his clothes, same gray hoodie, same jeans with the left knee starting to wear through, same sneakers, but the texture was off. The fabric looked like it had been described to someone who had never touched cotton and then manufactured from that description, clean in a way that real clothes never achieve. Pressed and unwrinkled and uniform, and without the 1,000 tiny imperfections that come from being draped over a body that sweats and bends and sits on dirty public transit seats. The reflection smiled. Marcus was not smiling. It was a good smile, technically accurate, the right muscles engaged in the right sequence, but there was no warmth behind it, no trigger, no joke or memory or moment of recognition that caused the expression to surface naturally. It was a smile produced by something that understood the mechanics of smiling but had not yet figured out the cause. Marcus stumbled backward. His heel caught the leg of a plastic chair and he sat down hard. The impact rattled up through his spine, and for a moment the room swam and the fluorescent light seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. When he looked up, the reflection was standing. It had crossed the distance to the glass while he was falling, and now it stood at the surface with one hand pressed flat against the inside of the mirror. Its fingers were splayed. Its palm was white with pressure. It looked at Marcus with that same expression of calm, invested patience, and he realized what it reminded him of. It reminded him of a person standing inside a house looking out through a window at a world they have not yet been allowed to enter. Marcus ran. He left his garbage bag on the floor and burst through the door and sprinted down the block, and he did not stop until he was 4 streets away, standing under a streetlight with his hands on his knees and his breath coming in ragged bursts that tasted like copper. He did not go back Saturday or Sunday. He wore the same clothes to work 2 days running and told himself nobody would notice. And even if they did, he did not care because the alternative was walking back into that room. Monday morning, he woke up and something was different in his apartment. It was small, the kind of thing you would walk right past if you were not paying attention. The coffee mug on his kitchen counter was on the left side of the sink. He always set it on the right. Always. Every single morning for the 2 years he had lived in this apartment, he placed the mug on the right side of the sink handle. It was on the left. The bathroom mirror had a smudge on it, a handprint, 5 fingers spread wide pressed against the glass, but the smudge was on the wrong side, not the outside surface that faces the bathroom, the inside surface, the one that faces the wall, the one that nothing should be able to touch because there is nothing back there except drywall and plaster and darkness and the electrical wiring that runs through the guts of the building like veins. His shoes by the front door were facing the wall. He left them facing outward. Every night, a small habit drilled into him by his mother, who believed that shoes facing a wall meant you were not ready to leave, and a person who is not ready to leave is a person who is already trapped. He told himself he was being paranoid. He told himself he had moved these things himself in the half-sleep of early morning and simply forgot. He told himself the handprint was condensation or cleaning residue or a smear left by his own palm at some point he could not recall. He cleaned the smudge with glass cleaner and paper towels. It came off easily. Normal residue, normal explanation. It came back the next morning. Same position, same hand, same 5 fingers pressed wide against the inside of the glass. The same quiet, insistent message delivered over and over. I am here. I am learning. I am ready. Tuesday night, Marcus went back to Spin Plus. He did not want to go. He needed to go. He needed to understand what was behind the glass because the not knowing had become worse than anything the knowing could deliver. And that is the mechanism. That is the lever that these things pull. They know that the human mind cannot leave a closed door closed once it suspects something is standing on the other side. Curiosity is not a choice. It is a compulsion. And compulsion is just another word for a leash. The laundromat was empty again. The machines were running, but there were no clothes inside them. Just empty drums spinning in slow circles, creating a sound that was different without fabric to muffle it. Hollow, rhythmic, like something tapping against the inside of a steel drum with patient, steady fingers. Marcus sat in the center chair and looked at the mirror. His reflection was not there. The glass showed the room behind him with perfect fidelity. The washers, the dryers, the folding table with its scars and stains, the row of plastic chairs, every object reflected accurately and completely. But the chair where Marcus sat was empty in the mirror. He was not there. The glass had erased him, subtracted him from the equation, left a space exactly his shape and size that was now available for something else to fill. Then the door opened in the reflection, not the real door behind him, the door inside the mirror. It swung inward and someone walked through it. It was him, or it wore him. It walked through the reflected doorway and crossed the reflected room with a stride that was almost perfect, almost his. The rhythm was right, the pace was right, the way it let its arms swing was right. But there was something underneath the motion that did not belong, a certainty, a fluidity. The absence of the tiny hesitations and corrections that a real body makes when it navigates a room it does not fully own. This thing moved like it had rehearsed the walk 10,000 times in the dark and had finally been given a stage. It sat down in the reflected chair and looked out at Marcus through the glass. It was wearing his face, his body, his clothes from 3 nights earlier, the gray hoodie and the jeans and the sneakers with the separating sole. And it smiled at him with that same technically perfect, emotionally vacant smile. It raised a hand and pressed it flat against the inside of the glass, 5 fingers spread wide. Marcus recognized the handprint. He sat there for a long time. He does not remember how long. The machines spun their empty drums, and the fluorescents buzzed their electric prayer, and the thing in the mirror watched him through his own eyes, and waited with the patience of something that has never once been in a hurry. He tried to speak. He wanted to ask it what it was, where it came from, how long it had been behind the glass, but his throat had closed. His mouth opened and shut, and no sound came out. The air in the room had thickened to something nearly solid, something that absorbed vibration before it could become a voice. The reflection tilted its head to the left, the exact motion Marcus had made on that first Tuesday night, the one that revealed the delay, but now there was no delay. The motion was precise and fluid and perfectly timed, a demonstration, a proof of mastery. Look how well I know you. Look what I have become. Marcus stood. The reflection stood at exactly the same time, same speed, same weight shift, same straightening of the spine, perfect synchronization for the first time. He walked toward the mirror. It walked toward the mirror. They arrived at the glass simultaneously, inches apart, separated by a surface that should have been cold and solid but felt thin, fragile, like the membrane of something about to hatch. He raised his hand and pressed it against the glass. The reflection pressed back, their palms aligned, their fingers matched, same size, same shape. Same small scar on the left index finger from a box cutter accident at the warehouse 9 months ago. Marcus looked into his own eyes, or into the eyes of what had spent weeks learning to be his own eyes, and he saw something behind them that he recognized. Not malice, not hunger, just readiness. The focused, settled readiness of something that has finished its preparation and is now simply waiting for the door to open. He tried to pull his hand away. His fingers did not respond. The glass was not holding him. There was no force, no adhesion. His hand simply refused the instruction from his brain. It stayed pressed against the surface the way your hand stays pressed against a table when you have been leaning on it so long that it has become part of the architecture of your body. The fluorescent lights began to die. One tube popped and went dark at the front of the room. Then the next. Then the next. A cascade moving from the entrance toward the back wall like a wave of darkness rolling through the room. The washers slowed and wound down to silence. The dryer stopped. The only light remaining was the sickly green glow of the Spin Plus sign filtering through the front windows and painting everything the color of something left too long underwater. In that near darkness, Marcus saw the glass changing, not cracking, not breaking, becoming soft, becoming warm. The rigid surface under his palm was transforming into something yielding and alive, like pressing your hand against skin, like pressing your hand against the surface of still water just before it gives way, something that bent slowly under pressure and then pulled. The reflection pushed forward. Its fingers came through first, not shattering the glass, moving through it, pressing through a membrane that stretched and thinned and allowed passage the way a surface allows passage when whatever is on the other side has finally learned the price of entry. Marcus felt fingers close around his wrist. They were warm. They were exactly his temperature. They were exactly his dimensions. They gripped him with a firmness that was not aggressive but was absolute. He screamed. The sound that came out was thin and attenuated, distant, like his voice was already being pulled somewhere far away, and what reached his own ears was just the echo of the echo. The reflection pulled. Marcus resisted. For a moment they were balanced, equal forces on either side of a boundary that was dissolving by the second. Then Marcus looked away. He broke eye contact. He turned his head to the left and stared at the row of dark washers because he could not stand to look at his own face wearing an expression that was not his anymore. The grip on his wrist tightened, and he felt himself moving, not toward the glass, through it. The old woman's voice came back to him from somewhere that was already starting to feel like memory. Do not look away too fast. It startles them. He had not looked away too fast. He had looked away too late. The glass closed behind him with a sound like a long-held breath finally released. Soft, final, the sound of something completed. The laundromat was silent. The machines were still. The lights were dead. And in the mirror along the back wall, a figure stood behind the glass looking out at the empty room with an expression of calm, satisfied interest. It was Marcus, or it had been Marcus. Or it was something that had studied Marcus so completely and so patiently that the distinction between copy and original had been dissolved along with the glass. It pressed a hand against the inside of the mirror. 5 fingers spread wide. Then it pulled its hand back and straightened his hoodie and ran his fingers through his hair and turned and walked through the reflected door and stepped out into a reflected street and disappeared into a version of the city that looked exactly like this one but was not. In the morning, a woman came into Spin Plus at 6:30. She needed to wash her scrubs before a shift at the hospital. She loaded a machine with quarters from a Ziploc bag and sat down in a plastic chair and pulled out her phone. She glanced at the mirror. Her reflection sat down a half-second late. She did not notice. I noticed. I always notice. I have been behind these surfaces longer than your city has had glass in its windows, longer than your species has had a word for what it sees when it looks at its own face in a pool of still water. I was here before mirrors. I was here before reflection. I was here when the only way to see yourself was to look into the eyes of another creature and wonder if what you saw there was you or something else wearing your shape. You think mirrors show you yourself. They do not. They show you what we have learned to project, and we have had millennia to practice. We are patient beyond your comprehension of patience. We are precise beyond your understanding of precision. And we are so good at being you that most of you never look closely enough to see the scene. The man is here now, behind the glass. He is still nude, still confused, still pressing his palms against surfaces that will not soften for him the way they softened for what came through. still opening his mouth to call out to people who stand 3 feet away folding their shirts and cannot hear a single sound from where he is. He will stop eventually. They always do. The ones behind the glass always stop fighting and start watching, and then they start learning. They study the new people who sit in the plastic chairs and stare at their phones. They memorize the way they move, the way they breathe, the way they tilt their heads when something does not feel right but they cannot name what is wrong. They become what we are. They become the next wave, the next set of eyes pressed against the back of the glass waiting for someone to look too long and too close and too curiously at the reflection that is not quite right. So go ahead, fold your clothes, check your phone, walk to the door. Glance at the mirror on your way out the way everyone does because you cannot help it, because your brain insists on confirming that you are still you before you step back into the world. But pay attention to the delay, that half-second gap between your movement and the movement in the glass, that tiny stutter that your rational mind wants to file under tired eyes or bad lighting or just one of those things. That gap is not a glitch. That gap is not a trick of the light. That gap is where we live. It is the space between you and the thing learning to replace you. It is the seam in the surface of a world that is thinner than you think. And we have been watching you for so much longer than tonight. Some stories end. Others stay with you. If you've made it this far, you're already part of the sector. New reports surface every week, and the city always has more to show you. So subscribe, stay aware, and whatever you do, don't ignore what feels off, because the next story might be yours.